Degrees of Women's Anger, Burning Hot, Cold, or Out of Control, presented by Eleanor Jones and Bailey Burkett.
There is no shortage of writings that problematize anger and specifically problematize women's anger. In the Western tradition, writings by Stoic philosophers, specifically Seneca, and biblical texts define and counsel against anger. Now, women can perform their anger and use it as a catalyst for social change. Anger, previously accepted as a male emotion, has been reclaimed by women seeking to eliminate the stigma surrounding angry women and to validate their discontent. Rather than controlling their anger and conforming to submissive gender politics, women are speaking out against social injustice. For our discussion, we will focus on recent writings on anger, specifically writings by Sara Ahmed, Martha Nussbaum, Soraya Chemly, and Rebecca Traister. These authors and their texts are in a conversation with similar source material and traditions and with each other. They differ, however, on the role of anger in personal and social life. In an age of pronounced hostility, Traister and Chemly seek to shift the public response to women's anger from being anger as that which women must avoid if they are to be taken seriously, to anger being an imperative if meaningful societal change is to occur. Providing women with the tools to release themselves from repressive and gendered emotions and standards of femininity, Ahmed, Chemly, Traister, and other remarkable women have worked to create spaces for women to be angry, and for anger to be an acceptable emotion for women. Additionally, Nussbaum, Ahmed, Chemly, and Traister differ in their understanding of the ways anger divides and brings women together. How does anger highlight similarities and differences between women? Finally, though each of these authors discuss the tension between being angry and being out of control, they have different solutions to this problem. For centuries, the conflation between anger and recklessness, unreason and irrationality, was used to keep anger at bay and to delegitimize social critiques expressed in anything but cold, rational tones. Given the association of women with emotionality and irrationality, the pressure to not be angry was more real. Being angry and being out of control were being conflated with each other as a way to delegitimize women's anger. Through this research, we found a way to separate anger from irrationality and, in doing so, rehabilitate women's anger and reclaim it as a useful tool of social critique and protest.
This project intended to incorporate the qualities and art of the anger movement, as well as the theory behind the emotions and use of emotions. We wanted to internalize our anger and then utilize it to inform our writings and art as a way of putting our theory into practice. Social media has had a tremendous influence on activism. Our research conveys this growing online presence by discussing political and social issues to raise awareness and engagement while creating a space of solidarity for women in their anger. The art created in tandem with the research addresses ongoing contemporary issues in a form that is personal, emotional, and accessible to most readers, while still encompassing the breadth of theory, art, and intersections with women's anger. Ultimately, the audience connects to the art and text, further developing a community that can utilize anger as a progressive tool. The goal is to create content that encourages women to voice their anger, normalize their anger in society, demonstrate methods of a reformed anger management, and emphasize the value of anger as a resource for women.
Key to the revitalization of anger is understanding what anger is and how anger moves through society. Sara Ahmed, in Living a Feminist Life, discusses the frustrations that women face for having the audacity to want to be treated equitably, which she problematizes through figures like the feminist killjoy. The killjoy is the angry and willful woman who spoils the fun for everyone else by calling attention to the marginalization of women's issues. The killjoy is framed as the problem and remains on the margins until she snaps and uses her passion and anger to call for an end to years of oppression based on gender. In The Cultural Politics of Emotion, Sara Ahmed explains how anger, as a free radical that can attach to and be detached from different objects, thereby changing their affective charge, motivates or stifles social change. Anger can be, quote, a response to the injustice of racism, as a vision of the future, as a translation of pain into knowledge, and as being loaded with information and energy, end quote. Ahmed thinks that anger has the ability to move from object to object like a shapeshifter that can adapt and change based on the situation, all while remaining contributive to its environment. Based on the idea that anger is a free radical that can attach to anything, our question is what has prevented women from attaching their anger to social issues that are relevant to their private and public lives? Why haven't women been allowed to be angry about and then use that anger as a motivator to change injustices that they suffer as women? Ahmed sees possibility in anger. She describes how anger, quote, moves us outwards. While it creates an object, it also is not simply directed against an object, but becomes a response to the world, end quote. The outward movement that anger creates through the relation to the object enables anger to act as a unifier towards those oppressed. Quote, learning to hear the anger of others without blocking the anger through defense of one's own position is crucial, end quote. Here, Ahmed characterizes anger as socially transformative and as a radical agent in the ways that women can be unified and transformed by a community of angry women. Contra Ahmed, Nussbaum's anger can be described as a slow, cool burn, where Ahmed's anger burns hot and must be contained before it gets out of control, hence the remonstration of the feminist killjoy. Nussbaum's anger is motivating but never gets out of control. Nussbaum states, quote, awakening people to the injustice of society's treatment of them is a necessary first step towards social progress, end quote. And this is when she explains how anger can be used as a reformative tool. If Nussbaum's anger is a slow, cool burn, then that flame burns more or less intensely relative to how intimate the relationship is. Proximity dials the flame up or down, and proximity makes anger more or less productive in maintaining or changing that relationship. Relationships in the intimate realm are more personal, and the deep trust between partners makes them more vulnerable to one another. The middle realm encompasses people encountered on a regular basis. Interactions and relationships are not intimate. Lastly, the political realm examines the virtue of institutions and the virtue of the people that support and inhabit those institutions. Though anger can occur in all three realms, its usefulness remains an open question. Nussbaum uses the concept of transition anger to delimit the usefulness of anger's intensity and longevity. Transition anger is when, quote, a reasonable person shifts off the terrain of anger toward more productive, forward-looking thoughts, asking what can actually be done to increase either personal or social welfare, end quote. In terms of social realms, the more the public the situation or relationship, the faster someone has to transition away from anger in order to move forward. First, to a state of mind that allows the past to be left behind, and second, to emotions that Nussbaum thinks build consensus and solidarity. Nussbaum and Ahmed intersect in interesting ways. Both think that situations or conflicts that provoke emotions, specifically anger, can happen in a variety of environments. Nussbaum brings that dynamic into her theory on anger by defining anger within each social realm. Ahmed is additive to Nussbaum in the way she defines anger as having a fluidity that allows anger to move through relationships of varying intensities. Relationships and the connections between people and spheres are not as binary as Nussbaum illustrates, and Ahmed's radical agent fills the void. Ahmed's idea of anger as a free radical that can attach or be attached to an attitude, concept, event, or cause means that anger has the potential to do something. In this way, anger is like kinetic energy. It has the potential to do work. Nussbaum's idea of transition anger is similar in the way that anger is turned from a feeling into an action. Anger is a signal that something has gone wrong, or that someone or something has been downranked in a way that they do not deserve. As long as the anger is taking you somewhere new, or to feel something you have not felt, or to communicate in a different way, or to do something for others, or something changes for yourself, then anger can be somewhat useful. However, Nussbaum does not allow anger to linger, and says that doing so is destructive to personal and social relationships. Anger is not useful in and of itself. Anger must go through a process of transubstantiation and become something that lessens the likelihood of becoming angry again. Both Nussbaum and Ahmed arrive at a place that implies community that is ultimately improved by the work that the anger has done, whether that is by making a social change or adjustment, or the ways that anger took people and reassembled them into new relationships. Different from Nussbaum and Ahmed, who saw in anger the danger of being out of control, Soraya Chemly in Rage Becomes Her, The Power of Women's Anger, sees anger as an opportunity for control. Nussbaum's emphasis on transitioning away from anger and Ahmed's use of the feminist killjoy as a cautionary tale for women who assert their anger cast anger as first, random and destructive, so that second, anger had the potential to disrupt personal and social relationships. Chemly points out that this understanding of anger as something that must be managed is problematic because, quote, anger management techniques often take into account only an excessively narrow band of anger expression, end quote, that is categorized by destructive, monstrous rage, mainly the kind that is stereotypically associated with men. Chemly suggests, quote, for women, healthy anger management doesn't require us to exert more control, but rather less, end quote. She writes that women are, quote, managing anger all the time without even realizing it. Even this idea of control and management is a limiting way to think about anger if you want it to be purposeful, deliberate, engaging, and change-making, end quote. This marks the biggest difference between Nussbaum and Ahmed and more writings on anger that emerged after the #MeToo movement. These writings are shifting away from anger as something that must be managed towards a more complete and substantial release of anger. This is an anger that burns hot, an anger that can be a catalyst for change. Instead of anger being out of control, anger is a way for women to get out of being controlled. These new writings on anger, which articulate a new permission for women to be angry, recast the relationship between anger and control in a new positive way. Women's anger has been so restricted, almost caged, that we are unaware of how much work can be done with anger.
What allows this project to go beyond normal undergraduate research practices is the explicit connection between the theory and the creation of art. Artists and activists are taking advantage of new social media platforms to create content and showcase their ideals through popular media that has a global reach, allowing for unifying and instantaneous mass communication. Throughout history, feminists have used visual art to call attention to social issues and speak out where they would otherwise be censored. Works by artists like Barbara Kruger, Judy Chicago, and the Guerrilla Girls have disrupted male-dominated institutions through their political, social, and especially feminist provocations and analyses of sex, religion, gender, racial stereotypes, and disadvantages of social minorities. The feminist critique of American culture and patriarchal society has motivated other female artists to follow their example by joining the creative revolution and expressing frustration with contemporary social issues through their art. Art is a visual expression of human creativity and is appreciated for its beauty and emotional power. At the same time, art is a mode of communication used by the artist to share how they experience the world, thus allowing the audience to adopt a different social perspective upon viewing it. Art communicates intimate concepts that cannot be explained by words alone, so it aids the investigation of historical and contemporary representations of women's anger in the imperative combination of art and writing to address contemporary issues regarding women's rights. The article titled Contraperception was written by Ellie as a response to the assumption of men that women have the contraception piece of sex handled, furthering the assumptions and socialized norms of pregnancy and childbirth fall on the woman opposed to a shared responsibility. Upon reading the article, my interpretation was that while her focus was direct and her frustration palpable, there were subtle nuances within the article. It was evident that the issue at hand was a lot deeper than what was just on the surface. It problematizes the societal belief that women are responsible for contraceptive use, the societal standards and expectations of women, and men's desire to control and regulate women's bodies, as well as the bodies of other individuals suppressed by the white patriarchal social structure of the United States. The package of women's birth control is the sole object in the composition of the piece, and its harmless appearance designated by the delicate lines, pastel colors, and seemingly simple imagery. The unassuming object is contrasted by the fine print on the package that targets patriarchal society and its control over women's bodies. The imagery and text on the package is a juxtaposition of the internal and external emotions of women, and how society perceives them as non-threatening and unassuming. However, there is an ever-present rage that is starting to slowly boil to the surface and reveal itself. Rebecca Tracer's Good and Mad, The Revolutionary Power of Women's Anger, was the text that showed me how my anger, specifically anger at injustice, can be used in a progressive manner, and the role art and women's anger plays in the history of American reform. Tracer suggests that political anger can be a communicative tool, a call to action, or even a form of engagement. Inspired by female artists before me and Tracer's positive descriptions of anger, I was able to produce this piece. In response to the Alabama Human Life Protection Act, also known as the Alabama Abortion Ban, by channeling my own anger toward the injustice against women's reproductive rights, I created a series of posters that depict the 25 Alabama senators who approved the bill. This illustration set depicts the senators with their mouths covered by tape, placed within a frame that numbers and identifies them, and at the bottom of the frame it says, "No uterus, no opinion." The tape and statement on the frame culminate to address the most infuriating part about the decision. The 25 senators who voted and approved the ban were all white men. 25 votes, and of those votes, not a single uterus. Not one. How are women supposed to respond when their reproductive rights lie in the hands of the white male political minority? This puts the senators and their actions on display, subjugating them to the same treatment that women continue to face, silence and oppression, while the art itself is a statement of reform. By using my anger in art, I am seeking to put our theory into practice and to redefine perceptions of women's anger as a creative and progressive tool for change against injustice. In their text, Kimberly and Tracer champion the progressive power of anger and encourage women to channel their anger towards causes for and beyond themselves. Where society tends to discourage anger because of its potential to overturn oppressive norms, these women and myself create spaces to use the power in anger for change in art and writing. The true threat is the hate that does not discriminate between its targets and confuses intensity of feeling for the intensity with which the marginalized experience oppression. This is a hate that is not controlled or contained. and is allowed to roam throughout society as normative behaviors in addition to promoting cultural messages that women's anger is irrational, dangerous, or laughable. Society declares anger as a vengeful and ineffective force. The denigration of women's fears suggests that those in power, the majority being men, are aware of the threat it poses as a tool for change. They seek to contain this threat through belittlement, censorship, and in the case of the Alabama abortion bill, restricting bodily autonomy. With more states introducing similar bills, women cannot afford to suppress their anger any longer. Ultimately, my artwork is a call to action to end social and political injustice at the hands of an oppressive, controlling patriarchy. The influences of Ahmed, Nussbaum, Tracer Kimley, and others are all paving the way for women to embrace their anger. Their work is an invitation to be angry and to stay angry. The intensity of that anger is the fuel that sustains calls for social change. In these more recent texts, anger has been redeemed. Anger no longer has to be managed. Anger is now the response to what can no longer be managed. For management endured with a smiling face. Reformed anger management looks towards the unification of women with marches, movements, and art in a way that uses their similarities and differences towards social and institutional change. Ultimately, women are breaking away from the control mold implemented around their anger and leaning closer to an out-of-control perspective and approach. Are you angry yet? You should be.